Anyway, so welcome to another class of Hagley Does History. Um, we've had a real fun semester, I think, a really interesting semester, some great talks and all that. But wait, there's more. This should be the last talk according to the University of Delaware's Osher Institute for Lifelong Learning, but it's not for us. We have one more talk in our plans, and that's going to be about Louise DuPont Crowninshield, a very important person for the DuPont property. Among other things, she willed the museum property to us back in the 1950s, and also is an important leader of historic preservation. Very important person. They were starting to look more into her role at Hagley and nationally. We've done some work in the Crowninshield Gardens, which is an interesting process there. And so we're going to hear from Carolyn Western, our museum curator of exhibits, next week about Louise Crowninshield. To do this, we are going to have to send you a different Zoom link, since this Zoom link will expire, but I assure you, you'll get it shortly. And you can just click on that and we continue on as before. We're also going to invite Hagley staff to watch in on this. I think this is very useful. But anyway, so we'll look forward to that email. Don't be confused. If you click on this link next time, it's not going to work, but we will send you this new Zoom link, and all you have to do is click and it will pop up and you will be able to see what's going on there. So you're getting an extra bonus from the Hagley Museum and Library, another session outside of what you've registered for through Osher. All right, so enough advertising here. Let's go to today's at hand. We're here with Chris Cascio, who is the assistant curator for the patent models. And he's going to give us a more about him. I mean, as you may know, the library and the museum operate in somewhat different universes at Hagley. Sometimes we feel like we're in different galaxies even. So I have not worked much with Chris, but I mean, we appreciate the collection there, everything which is going on. It's an important asset at Hagley, so I want you to learn about it. And he's going to talk about the patent models. It's an enormous collection that Hagley has that soon will be on exhibit in the visitor center in a very, very big way. So in a way, this is a coming attraction, heads up that you do not know about yet, about what's going on at Hagley. So Chris, why don't you go ahead, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at Hagley, and then charge into this.
Okay, well, again, my name is Chris Cascio, and I am the assistant curator of patent models here at Hagley Museum. I have been in the museum field now for about 30 years. I got my master's degree at University of Delaware, yay. And I'm part of a team of curators and people who manage the museum collection here at Hagley. And my focus is, as Roger had said, primarily on the patent model collection, in which we have the second largest patent model collection in the country, numbering nearly 5,000 patent models. And while Hagley Museum largely tells the DuPont story itself is about innovation. It's about coming up with new products. It's developing new industries. The DuPont company evolved greatly over its 200 plus year history. And I can't think of many objects that capture that better than the patent model. And I'm going to tell you quite a bit more about patent models and the patent model process and why they're so unique to America and American innovation later. But that's primarily my job, is to focus on that section of the collection. Another thing that's unique about Hagley's patent model collection is it's still being processed. Most museums, a lot of their collection has already been cataloged, it's already been looked at, it's been documented, it's been researched. Whereas Hagley, we received an enormous donation of patent models in 2015, and I'm still in the process of actually unpacking that collection and processing it. And I'll show you some images later that will give you an idea of what that process involves. So that's me, and that's what I do. Anything else, Roger, before I jump in?
That's great. Just go right ahead.
All right, fantastic. Okay, well, the title of my presentation today is Patent Models, Artifacts of the American Spirit. One of the things that is unique about America is our ability to come up with new technologies. From the light bulb to the smartphone to the electric car, Americans are known as innovators. We have an uncanny ability to create products and entire industries that revolutionize how people live around the world. It is this creativity that's become a defining aspect of the American spirit. And as I'd mentioned earlier, a few objects represent that spirit better than patent models. Well, what is a patent model? Very basic, very simple question. Throughout much of the 19th century, when America and indeed the world transitioned to an industrial economy, models were required when applying for a patent to the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Along with the technical description, which you can see if you look left or right to the screen, you see what I'm describing. Along with a technical description and the drawing, applicants provided a small detailed replica of their invention. This model had to demonstrate in exacting detail what process, action, or function would be covered by the patent if granted. The model will be a key witness in any trial if any other inventor copied or tried to use that invention. The model showed not only that your invention worked, but how it worked, so much so that it would be easy for a judge or jury with little technical knowledge to understand how it was unique. Because of this requirement, which was only applied in America, the patent model, when viewed individually or as part of the development of entire industries, represents American innovation in miniature at a critical moment in world economic history. Americans of the 19th century, perhaps more than any other country in the world, viewed machines as a potential solution to any problem. Our embrace of innovation, of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or what is called STEM in the current modern curriculum, made America the worldwide leader in manufacturing, spawning household names that are still in business today, like the patent models you see here on your screen for Bissell's carpet sweeper, Whitman's candy machine, Steinway's pianoforte frame, and Beam's whiskey still, all of which are models in Hagley's collection. Patent models capture a solution to a very particular problem at a precise moment in time. We know who made them, where they lived, where they were made, and most importantly, why. All this is spelled out in agonizing technical detail in their patent application. Since they represent a solution to a problem, they also document the everyday struggles of 19th century Americans. Models address not only issues in the workplace, but also in the home. They represent minor miracles. As demonstrated in the models you see here, they brought light to darkness, relief to the sick, sustenance to the hungry, and enabled the lame to walk. How to preserve food, how to stay warm, how to wash clothes, how to escape from a fire. All these everyday worries and challenges are represented in patent models. In that sense, a patent model represents a moment in time when our ancestors threw up their hands and screamed, "There has to be a better way," maybe with an expletive or two thrown in there. Quite simply, patent models are a physical manifestation of a gripe. If history had a complaint department, the patent model collection at Hagley could be its prop room. Models are also unburied archaeology. They represent machines that long ago were replaced by other machines. When obsolete or irreparable, they were thrown out or recycled into other materials. And every nut, bolt, gear, or pulley represents hardware that may not exist anymore. In some case, they're all that is left and are studied by engineers and scholars hoping to understand and document that history. But above all that, they're just beautiful machines. They represent the pride of the inventor. Some inventors spared no expense to make their model not only functional, but attractive. Perhaps they knew that these models with the inventor's name proudly displayed would be seen for generations. Anyone with any basic understanding of how things look in the 19th century could tell that that is when these were made. They epitomize what can broadly be called the Victorian aesthetic. The choice of materials, their rich decoration, scream, "Notice me." Finally, a patent model represents a man's or a woman's dreams. Perhaps the motivation was to create a better world through their ideas, but also hopes of fame and fortune. Men like Alexander Graham Bell, Samuel Morse, and Thomas Edison were held in as high regard as Ben Franklin, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson to many Americans in the 19th century. They were founding fathers in their own right and worshipped as such. Some built enormous wealth through their inventions. Most inventors represent our collection, however, did not. Few ever made it beyond the inventor's barn or workshop. Hagley's models collection, unfortunately, then represents dreams shelved, dreams unfulfilled. With that as an introduction today, I will talk about the history of the American patent process and patent models, and how others acknowledged our unique American spirit of innovation in the 19th century. All this is merely a preamble to Hagley's exhibit, Nation of Inventors, that Roger had mentioned earlier today, that opens this fall. This exhibit undoubtedly will tell the story much better than I can, especially in a Zoom lecture. I guess the best place to start is at the beginning of our country. Here we see an image of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and a quote here on the left that I think kind of captures the situation that our country was in at that time. The quote states, "Invention fleshed out the spirit of the American Revolution. Now freed from despotic authority, the young country was required to develop its own natural resources in land and people. Indeed, it was forced to do so." Throughout the colonial period, America was greatly restricted on what machines they could import and the types of industry that they could develop. The whole purpose of the colony was to produce raw materials, and those raw materials were sent back to England, and then they were processed into products, and those products were sold back here to Americans. Because of all that, England did not have any interest whatsoever in us developing our own technological capabilities. Whatever technology did occur was largely by coincidence or because immigrants were coming over from Europe and bringing whatever knowledge they had. Also, there were instances where certain plans for machines and other technology that was either memorized or smuggled out was actually being used here in the country. Whenever they were writing the Constitution, they recognized that they needed to have a patent system in order to promote industry here in America, and also to protect the rights of the people who are coming up with those inventions. So Article 1, Section A of the U.S. Constitution grants the right of granting patents to the Congress. It states that the Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. And further on, that particular article spells out exactly what is necessary for someone to earn a patent. It states that the grantee or grantees of each patent shall, at the time of granting the same, deliver a specification in writing containing description, accompanied with drafts or models, which I highlighted, if the nature of the invention of the discovery will admit a model. Wait, what? A model? Our whole patent system was based on a system in England under English common law. And yes, they had the written description, just like it states. And yes, they had, you had to provide a drawing. But all of a sudden they came up with this idea that you needed a model. It just really kind of seemed to come out of nowhere. And though I've only been in this job for about 6 months or so, I've been going through as many secondary sources as I can to try and figure out where this whole model idea came from. And to be honest, I really haven't been able to find an answer. However, there was one particular author who had an idea. You see, our framers of the Constitution didn't really have intimate knowledge of machines or technology. Many of them were extremely well educated. They were brought up in law, in politics. They understood the natural sciences and philosophy, navigation, surveying, mathematics, all that sort of thing. But because of the restrictions on technology here in the colonies, they really didn't know a lot about machines. So, for instance, they probably never would have seen the two images that you see here, one of which is the Newcomen steam engine from 1712, and the other is the Watt-type steam engine of circa 1780. These were being applied in England and being used primarily in mines, but also beginning to use in other mills and factories as well. These would have seemed like complete, strange, crazy steampunk-type machines to our founding fathers. So perhaps that might have been one of the reasons why that they incorporated a model. Another reason might be because of this gentleman on the left. His name is John Fitch. You can see his invention here on the right, which was a very early version of a steamboat. John Fitch had developed his own steam engine, and he had tried to get a patent under the old Articles of Confederation, but there wasn't any rights granted under the Articles that could be assigned to him. So he campaigned for many years to earn a patent on his invention before somebody could copy it or could profit off. So whenever the framers were in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 talking about the Constitution, he actually brought a model of a steamboat there, a full-size, full-scale model of a steamboat. And on August 22nd, the Constitutional Convention actually adjourned so that the framers could come and see this. And a few of them actually took a ride on this steamboat. Now, if you could imagine someone who has very little knowledge of mechanics, of engines, of machines, seeing this thing for the first time, seeing something that could sail on the Delaware River, regardless of time or wind or tide, and go anywhere that you wanted to. You had the inventor there to show you specifically in detail how this engine worked. All of a sudden, 2 weeks later, whenever the article to establishing patent rights was introduced, there was no debate, there was no discussion, no dissension. Everybody voted for it immediately. Perhaps it was because of seeing Mr. Fitch's steamboat that they thought that this model requirement would have been very important. To have the benefit of having a small scale representation of exactly what the patent was going to cover would have been very beneficial. One of the things the Patent Act set up was a board of examiners. And here you can see images of the 3 of the men that were involved in the board of examiners, and also President George Washington. The board was made up of the Attorney General of the United States, in this case, Edmund Randolph, the Secretary of War, Henry Knox, and the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. And if a patent was approved, they would be signed by the President of the United States, in this case, George Washington. Now, I don't know if you know too much about these men. Certainly you know about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, but if you got a piece of paper, you may want to write their names down and Google them afterward. They're very accomplished individuals, and Edmund Randolph was actually one of the ones who introduced some of the rules for the Patent Act during the Constitutional Convention. So if you were writing to get a patent and you knew you were going to be writing to these gentlemen, I would imagine it'd be pretty intimidating. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Shark Tank, in which inventors come before a group of investors and talk about their invention and try to get support, but I can imagine it would be pretty intimidating and feel a little bit something like this. Now, while patentees did not appear in person in front of all of these gentlemen, the knowledge that you really had to plead your case in front of these guys would have been a little intimidating, I think. If you were granted a patent, you'll be issued a document like this, and it will be signed once again by the President of the United States. And you can see George Washington's signature down there on the right. This is actually an example of one of the patents that we have here. Now, we don't have a model for this particular patent because this patent is for a process. It's not really for a machine or for a thing. So you weren't required to submit a model, but you could submit a model, and were asked to submit a model if it was going to benefit the patenting process and enable the examiners to understand better about what you were applying for. Clearly, this process didn't work because 3 years after the first patent was issued, they completely did away with the Patent Board of Examiners. So Edmund Randolph, Henry Knox, Thomas Jefferson, they found that all of their other responsibilities in the government was too much for them to be reviewing these patents on a monthly basis. The only thing that remained part of this process was that every patent was still going to be signed by the President of the United States. What this meant was that instead of these 3 men reading patent applications, there would actually be someone in the Secretary of State's office, typically a clerk, who would be reading those applications. Now, what that meant was that most patents were just getting a rubber stamp. Nobody was really looking to see if they were useful or practical inventions, or if they might represent something that had already been invented. So it was a little bit of a step down in the process. By 1803, the government had moved to Washington, D.C., and we can see in this painting of Washington in that year that it's not quite the metropolis and city that we think of today. It was actually still rather rural. In fact, if you look at the center of the last building on the left there, that's actually the White House. And the first building over here on the right with the figures just below it, that is actually the home of the first U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. That is called Blodgett's Hotel. And here we can see a better image of Blodgett's Hotel, about what it looked like around 1810. At this point, it was about 7 years after the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office had become a more professional office within the Thomas Jefferson Secretary of State Department. At that point, because they didn't have the Board of Examiners, that Jefferson had realized that they needed more professional help to run this office. Jefferson was a big supporter of the patents. He was an inventor himself, but ironically, he was a person who didn't personally believe in patents. He thought that they restricted the public's access to those inventions too much, but he did recognize how important they were to the development of industries here in America. So Thomas Jefferson hired this guy, Dr. Thomas Thornton, to become the first superintendent of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I could honestly do an entire lecture just on Dr. Thornton. He's one of those sort of Gumpian founding fathers that seems to be involved with everyone and doing everything that's important in that time in America's history in the early republic. He was a very enthusiastic supporter of the Patent and Trademark Office. He also often hosted inventors who come up to the office personally and would allow them access to the patent model so that they could help refine and define their invention. And it was extremely valuable. He served in that role until he died in 1828. One of the people who knew Dr. Thornton, amongst many, was E.I. DuPont, who was the founder of the DuPont Gunpowder Company here at where I work at Hagley Museum. And he himself was a patentee. He had applied for a patent for a gunpowder graining machine. And one of the things that we've seen in the correspondence with E.I. DuPont is he's often complaining about having a lack of labor. That is one of the things that really sort of restricted the growth of industry here in America, was they were constantly thirsty for labor. And the machine that he invented actually would do the work of several workers, several men, so that he was able to do that better. And a lot of early industrialists here in America had encountered that problem of just having not enough skilled workers. The opposite was true in Europe, however. At that point, they had way too many people and not enough jobs. So while they were beginning, they certainly were ahead of America at that point in applying technology and industrial machinery. There was a lot of resistance amongst the workers. Here we can see an image of a group called the Luddites. The Luddites saw the machines as being a threat to their jobs, and here we can see an image of them actively trying to destroy some of the machinery. So they resorted to some violence and destruction to try to get their way. Here in America, we embrace technology a little more readily. If during the American Revolution America had to depend more upon domestic production, then it was certainly just as true when the War of 1812 broke out. In fact, during the early national period, when you have the War of 1812, you have a lot of these conflicts in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars. This greatly disrupted trade, so America became even more dependent on producing domestic manufacturers. And here we have an image of the burning of Washington, D.C. In August of 1814, British troops had landed and occupied the city. Dr. William Thornton knew that they were coming, and so he had enough time to get some people together and to make some crates and to crate up all the records of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. But because the 1,000 or so models were so bulky and so large, he didn't have enough time to get rid of them. A couple of days later, he heard that they were beginning to burn some of the buildings in Washington, D.C. So he himself went down there to meet with their commander and to plead his case to try to save the building. Now, the British weren't burning every building they could find. They were only targeting the government. They were only targeting public buildings. And so while we don't know exactly what Dr. Thornton said to them, supposedly he made the argument that the patent office was actually the model collection was actually a private collection, that those collections belonged to the individual inventors. And they further appealed to their sense of humanity, saying that this would be an enormous loss to science and technology and mankind if these models were lost. And he even compared it to the burning of the great Library of Alexandria in ancient times. Whatever he said, they agreed, and so they left the building alone. And Blodgett's Hotel ended up being one of the few public buildings that was left standing after the British were done burning and had abandoned the city. After the war was ended and after America was continuing to build its technology, they recognized that there was going to need to be some formal training for people who were involved in building, repairing, and inventing these engines. I sort of compared a little bit to the growth of computer schools in the early 20th century with the coming of the information age. They recognized that they needed to have some institutions that would provide more professional training. And here we have an image of the Franklin Institute, which was founded in 1824. You can also look to the founding of the Cooper Union in New York City as being another source for training these individuals. And you can see a quote up here in the corner that describes the purpose of why they were founded. And one of the interesting things for you all, and for me as a graduate of the University of Delaware, is that even though the Franklin Institute is now more considered a museum, their role as promoting science and technology actually was transferred to what became the Bartol Research Institute in 1924. And now that research institute is housed at the University of Delaware. Europeans were fascinated by the democratic experiment that was going on here in America, and many of them were coming to visit in the 18th century as well as in the 19th century. And here we have an image of Alexis De Tocqueville, a Frenchman who visited and toured the United States around 1830. And his particular observations of seeing what was going on here in the country, of our embrace of technology, of our belief in innovation and driving us to improve our domestic manufacture, I think that his quote captures it very well. He states that the American is no more attracted to a particular system of operations than to another. He doesn't feel himself tied to an old method than to a new one. The idea of the new is intimately connected in his mind with the idea of the better. The American is, above all, an innovator. That spirit is to be found, in fact, in all his works. He carries it everywhere to the deep woods and to the bosom of the cities. And thanks to the development of things like the steam engine, we were able to pretty much do exactly what he said. We were able to take technology and use machines in order to drive our economy. We used to be married to water sources that would be able to drive mills, but with the use of steam engines and things like that, we were able to greatly expand our technological output. About the time that he writes this in 1830, when there are railroads are beginning to grow here in America, America is importing all of their railroad engines from Europe. By the end of that decade, 1840, Americans were building their own railroad engines, and those locomotives were as good, if not better, than what they were making elsewhere in the world, to the point where we were exporting our own engines. So all this technological change happened very, very quickly, and it really enabled America to very quickly transform from a primarily rural and agricultural economy into an industrial one, and to thrive in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So much so that they recognized they needed to revise the Patent Act. And so in 1836, this gentleman here on the left, Senator John Ruggles of Maine, headed up the committee that was going to rewrite it. They recognized that the process of acquiring patents here in America was not working well. It was not protecting the rights of the inventors, and it was not helping technology develop as fast as they would like. So there were a couple of things that they changed about it. First of all, they not only had the model requirement still on the books, but they made it an absolute requirement that a model had to be provided. And the details of what that model was supposed to be and what it was supposed to look like was very specifically described. In this case, you can see in the quote, it says the model is not more than 12 inches square, should be neatly made. The name of the inventor should be printed or engraved upon or affixed to it in a durable manner. Also, they reinstituted the examiner board, but instead of having major politicians to do it, they actually had independent examiners who had experience in machines, in technology, in science, in mechanics, so that they would be best able to evaluate these machines, understand how they work, and be able to determine if they were actually a new and useful invention. They also added an appeal process so that if you applied for a patent and you didn't get it, you found out why, and you were given a chance to change or to update your invention. They were given a budget to hire a much larger professional staff. I think they had about 15 employees at that particular time after this act was passed. So that was a huge boon to them. They also made a little change. There was a fee structure for it. So it would cost $30 for a U.S. citizen to apply for a patent, $300 if a citizen of a foreign country, and $500 if you are a citizen of Great Britain. So you can see that they're really trying to encourage Americans to invent and trying to discourage anyone from other countries from imposing upon their development of industry. One of the other things they did is they went back to all the previous patents and they started a new numbering system. Previously, the patents really had been cataloged based upon the name of the patentee. And as the number of patents began to increase, this wasn't really a very workable system. So starting on July of 1836, anyone who applied for a patent would be, their patents would be numbered sequentially based upon when it was passed. And any patents that were issued before that were renumbered, and a number was, an X was added to that number. So like, for instance, if you had patent number 830 after 1836, that's sometime in the summer of 1836. If you had patent 1830X, that would have been for any time prior to 1836. Now, I showed you an image earlier of a patent model in which there was a patent tag. Each one of these models got a tag very similar to this, in which the name of the inventor, the name of the invention, the date it was patented is on it. In the upper left-hand corner, there's typically a number, and this would represent that sequential number that each individual patent was offered. Well, we do have some patent models in our collection that date before 1836, when they added these X numbers. And in this case, it says no number in the upper left-hand corner. So we know automatically, just by looking at that tag, that that would have been an X patent prior to 1836. Unfortunately, 5 months later, after the passage of the act, Blodgett's Hotel burned down. Enormous numbers of patent models and documents, all those things that Dr. Thornton had tried so hard to preserve and save, many of them were destroyed. And Congress appropriated funds to rebuild the collection. They went back to some of the original patentees to get any information or any patent documents that they had to reconstruct that. And they did recognize that the importance of the patent model collection, and not only to increase funds for the patent office, but also to build a brand new building. And this is what the building would eventually look like. Construction started in the late 1830s, but it wasn't completed for a couple of decades. This building was designed to house the patent office and all the models that we produced for the next 50 years. You can see it is a very large, very grand building. It was copied after the Parthenon, and it still stands today, and it is just a fantastic temple to American invention and to American innovation. I came across this quote when I was doing some research, and I think it really captures the particular thought in the American minds of the inventor at this time. It states, "We have no Alexander or Caesar or Bonaparte or Wellington to shine on the stormy pages of our history. We have names such as Franklin, Whitney, Morse, and a host of others to shed a more beneficent luster on the story of our rise." We began our talk with a painting of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. They represent our independence from Great Britain and the beginnings of our new nation. Now, Jordan Mott, who was a coal stove magnate, commissioned this group portrait of 18 U.S. science and inventors, including Cyrus McCormick, Charles Goodyear, Samuel Colt, Samuel Morse, all men who had altered the course of contemporary civilization. This painting was called a remarkable document of the growth of the American economy by the 1850s. I would put this painting alongside the painting of the men of the Declaration of Independence as capturing the spirit of America. Sure, there was no document to sign, no formal declaration to be read to citizens gathered in public squares or soldiers huddled in camps, but the message was all the same. Just as America spread democracy, freedom, and liberty throughout the world, America would come to define the innovative spirit of the century through its government support for the rights of inventors and its willingness to embrace the Industrial Revolution, all the mechanical improvements that changed the world over. By 1840, the first section of this new building was complete. The offices moved in around 1842, and they opened up for business. America had a Greek temple to honor their gods of invention, so brilliantly captured by that painting. And you can see from this diagram of the individual wings that were built that it took quite a long time for them to complete this building. The one at the lower part of the screen, the south wing, was completed first, and then they completed the rest of the wings, but they didn't really completely finish this building until after the Civil War. This is an image of the patent offices to give you a sense of what some of the men were doing there. Working on various inventions, working on models, reviewing them, copying and recopying patent documents. But there were only men working here. Over here, we have an image of Clara Barton. Clara Barton, who is more famous for being involved as a nurse and an advocate for the wounded Union soldiers during the Civil War, and eventually a founder of the American Red Cross, was actually worked at the patent office for several years. She worked there alongside her male colleagues, who unfortunately she complained quite a bit of mistreatment from them, but she endured the horrible summers in Washington, D.C. and the really cold winters alongside them, spending many hours copying patent documents. At this point, there were about 75 people working in the patent office. And she, in a letter to her sister, she wrote that, "My arm is tired and my poor thumb all calloused from holding my pen." In the new patent building, they created a museum of models, a place to store, not only to store the patent model collection, but also to make them a marquee attraction. There were 9-foot tall plate glass exhibition cases that were installed, and up to 100,000 models were stored here. This became a national tourist attraction. Up to 10,000 visitors a month would come to visit these models. And in addition to visiting these models, part of the purpose behind this was also to promote innovation, to promote invention here in America. It was their hope that inventors who were developing their own ideas would come here and look at the models and get a better way and a better idea of processes that they could use. Also, they perhaps inspired other people who had their own ideas sort of swimming around in their brain to go out there and invent. And that is why, perhaps one of the reasons why invention was such an occupation by many Americans in the 19th century. International exhibitions, which were held throughout the 19th century, also helped to promote American industry. On the left-hand side, you can see a slide of the what's known as the Crystal Palace exhibition in London in 1851. This was about 20 years after the Industrial Revolution really started to pick up pace here in America, and this was seen as sort of the coming out party for American industry. So this was an opportunity for Europe and for the rest of the world to see America and to see that Americans not only made machines, we made them extremely well. And over on the right, you can see in New York that we hosted our own exhibition here, near 2 years after the Crystal Palace exhibition. And this not only continued to show off our wares produced here in the country, but also an opportunity for Europeans to come here to America and to visit and see some of these factories firsthand. One of the big promoters of patents in the patent system in the 19th century was Scientific American magazine, which you can see their headquarters here in New York City in this slide. It was founded in 1845. And people who read that magazine were exposed to all kinds of new inventions. It was sort of like popular mechanics of the time. And Scientific American also offered services to help people to get their patents. Here you can see an interior view of their offices at that time. While inventions developed new industries and promoted jobs, also the whole idea of the patent industry had developed their own occupations and their own professional jobs. Here, one of the jobs that they had was sort of a caseworker called the Patent Solicitor. And Scientific American patent solicitors could basically take your idea and they could handle everything, soup to nuts, when it came to your patent application. They could write the description, they could give you some feedback on changes that could be made, they could arrange to have a model made. Also, for an extra fee, you could have your invention featured in their magazine, even made the cover story. They even had an office right across from the patent building. You can see the patent building on the left and the Scientific American offices right there on the right. That way, their patent solicitors could go right across the street into the patent office. They could research your patent. They could look at all the models in the museum and look at the diagrams that were on file. And they could also take your case directly to the patent board so that they could increase your chances of getting your patent approved. By 1890, about a quarter of all American patents went through the Scientific American magazine control. What about the models themselves? Model making also in and of itself became sort of an occupation at this particular time. And we can see an image on the left here of Harper's Ferry magazine showing a model maker at work in the 1860s. And one person had said that the model maker was to many branches of manufacture what the artist is to wood engraving, what the architect is to the builder. He furnishes the designs from which others work. It was important for many patentees to have a model maker involved because of how technical some of these machines were. They had experience with casting, with machining. They could really make the parts very easily and very well. Also, they could offer you suggestions and refinements on your model to help you have a better chance of getting your patent granted. Now, of course, this is an example of one of the patent models in our collection. You can see that you didn't have to go to a professional patent model. You could always make one yourself. This one is rather simple, but it does demonstrate the invention for a beer tap rather easily. It's simply made out of wood and with some handwritten writing on there. You could make this yourself. Many patent models were made by the inventors right in their workshop or their barn or their machine shop. Or you could always go down the street and talk to a furniture maker or someone who owned a machine shop who could knock you up a model. Others were much more fancy and much more elaborate. And I don't think there's any model in Hagley's collection that really captures what I referred to earlier as the Victorian aesthetic in this particular model. I mean, this guy has all the bells and whistles. It is a cash register machine, but all of the characteristics of the Victorian aesthetic are represented there. One of which is the use of fine casting of cast iron. Most of it's made of cast iron in these very fluid, sinuous forms. We have lots of painted decoration. Nearly every surface on this model is decorated with gilding, with birds, with flowers. And I love the little American flag right on the front of it too. Lots of shiny brass and metal. Just really extraordinary. I mean, this is a model that showed enormous amount of pride in the inventor, and it really just, like I said, it screams "notice me." This is how the patent building looked about the time of the American Civil War. As the Civil War began, and nearly every building in Washington, D.C. was used to feed, to house, or to care for the troops, and the patent building was not an exception. This is how the patent building looked in 1861. It actually housed troops from the 1st Rhode Island Infantry Regiment on the exhibition floor. You can see some the plate glass exhibition cases here in between the bunks. They were there for only about 3 months, but during that time period, they weren't really kind to the collection. About 400 panes of glass were broken and a number of the models went missing. Later in the war, the patent building is actually turned into a hospital. This is not an image of what the hospital looked like in the patent building. This is a different hospital, but from descriptions of what it looked like, it would have been very similar to this, with cots laying side by side and in rows in between all of the exhibit cases, and pretty much on every open square foot in the patent building. Walt Whitman visited the hospital. He had come from Brooklyn to Washington, D.C. to find his brother, who had gone missing after the Battle of Fredericksburg, which ironically the U.S. Army was commanded by Ambrose Burnside, who had previously commanded the regiment that had stayed in the patent building in a previous slide. He found his brother. His brother's perfectly safe, but he was struck by the plight of many of the wounded soldiers there. So Walt Whitman decided to stay there and to help in the hospitals. And he left us an impression of what he saw there in the hospital. He states, "I go sometimes at night to soothe and relieve particular cases. The glass cases, the beds, the forms lying there, the gallery above, the marble pavement underfoot, the suffering and the fortitude to bear it in various degrees. Occasionally from some the groan that could not be repressed. Sometimes a poor fellow dying. Such were the sights but lately in the patent office." Abraham Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln came to visit the wounded soldiers there too. And while he was there, Mr. Lincoln could have visited his patent model. Abraham Lincoln did apply for a patent back when he was a congressman. And you can see an image of his patent model. We don't have his model in our collection, actually. That one's at the Smithsonian. So while he was there visiting the soldiers, maybe he took a moment to track down his model and visit it. Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln returned to the building, but long after it had ceased to be a hospital, for their second inaugural ball held in March of 1865. They decided to have Patent Building hold that particular celebration, and this is what the ball looked like. They had to adapt the building a little bit for these purposes. You can see gas jets hanging down from the ceiling to light the nearly 4,000 people who attended this ball. Over on the left side, you can barely make out it's sort of right around here. You barely make out the bandstand where the band was located, and you see it was very gaily decorated and lots of fancy patriotic bunting. In addition to offer dancing, they also offered dinner. And you can see a menu over here on the right of what they would have served on a grand Instagram-worthy buffet that was open to the revelers at about midnight. But there was such a mad rush to get to the food that much of it was actually destroyed. And Mrs. Lincoln and Mr. Lincoln were appalled by some of the behavior of some of their guests. And Mrs. Lincoln called it a scramble. And Mr. Lincoln, having his typical calm demeanor and sense of humor, stated, "Well, it's a scramble, but it's a very systematic scramble." The Civil War was huge for industrial development here in America. Producing everything that both armies needed during the war really put us sort of at the next level of industrial development. And in 1876, to honor the American Centennial, they had a huge exhibition in Philadelphia, which put on display, once again, many of the mechanical and industrial processes that we have here in America. And one visitor, after of the 10 million or so who actually visited that exhibition that summer and that early fall of 1876, commented that the American invents as the Italian paints and the Greek sculpted. It is genius. This is what the interior of just one of those grand exhibition halls would have looked like. This, yet again, really promoted invention and the patent process here in America. There were a flood of patents that were coming through the office at this particular time. They were processing up to maybe 1,000 per month. So the pace of invention here in America had not slowed down. And here it gives you a sense of how much our patents had grown. This gives you the numbers of patents. Let's pull that down a little bit. Oops, sorry. The number of patents per decade. You can see in the beginning there was only 268 in the entire 10 years, from 1790 to 99. By the time we got to 1850, it's over 20,000. And then you jump another 40 years later, it's increased tenfold to 200,000. By this point, between 1870 and 1880, the patent office is just absolutely overwhelmed. So in 1870, the Congress decided to do away with the patent model requirement simply because they couldn't hold the volume. Now, the patent office kind of disagreed with that. They saw the value of those models and were willing to absorb whatever number happened to come through their doors. So they kind of unofficially accepted kept that rule on the books until 1880, and by 1880 they decided that they couldn't accept any patent models officially, though as represented in Hagley's collection and as we have found out, some inventors were still bringing patent models to the office well into the early 20th century. In September of 1877, tragedy struck the collection again. Another fire broke out in that supposedly fireproof building and absolutely devastated the models. The employees and also onlookers and the public scrambled to try and save as many of the models as they could, risking their lives in the process. And many months afterwards were spent cleaning and repairing the models. Congress appropriated about $45,000 for the reconstruction and the restoration of the collection. One person who witnessed this said, "Poor patentees, not a model, nor a paper, nor a book has been saved. The accumulated experience of 40 years lies smoking in ruins before me. Not all of it was destroyed. Probably about 2/3, about 87,000 of the models were lost, but another 27,000 or so were actually saved. And during the restoration process, some of those models got a very special tag. On the left-hand side, you can see the tag says that the model was taken from the debris of the fire. Many of these models also showed the scars of that particular fire. You can see this patent tag here, which has a number of scorch marks on it. By the time they got rid of the patent model requirement, they had moved the models out of the building in 1893 and put them into separate storage in areas that had once seen people gazing at awe. These beautiful models on display were now used for people who were researching and applying for patents. The model collection went through a series of storage areas, the next one worse than the one before. Eventually they ended up in a livery stable, and the government was tired of paying for their storage since they clearly weren't being used. And so in 1925, they decided to get rid of the collection. They offered some of the models before that to the Smithsonian. They ended up taking about 10,000 models eventually, but the rest of them were sold at auction. Some of them were bought in huge numbers by speculators and investors who, with the idea of turning these models into an exhibit. They still had just as much attraction value as they had whenever they were on display at the patent building. But unfortunately, those dreams never really came true, and the patent model collection slowly, that passed through many different owners, pieces were sold off, large groups of models were sold off to individuals, and the model collection slowly whittled down. Here we have an exhibit of some patent models here at Hagley. Hagley started collecting models in 1961 when we were offered about 800 models by a man by the name of Edward Tunnicliffe Fox. And that was our first sort of foray into collecting patent models. And these are on display, like I said, in the Copeland room today. And our staff does allow visitors to come and see the patent models there, and also offers tours. But that was, there's only maybe about 50 to 100 models at most on display at any given time. So it doesn't represent the nearly 5,000 that we have in our collection. And then in 2015, Anne and Alan Rothschild, who are pictured here on the left, who they had collected about 5,000 models themselves. They offered about 4,000 models here to Hagley Museum. And thankfully, we got that collection, and it is going to be the core of the collection that is going to be displayed in the Nation of Inventors exhibit. All of these models from Mr. Rothschild's collection were packed up and brought here to Hagley. Here you can see some of those models and all boxed up and here at Hagley. And this collection is still being processed by myself here at Hagley Museum. Each box is unpacked. Each model is taken out. Each model is cataloged, photographed, entered into our computer database, and researched online. Our models have been displayed in other areas around the world. Here we have an exhibition of our models in China. Here we have an exhibit of our models right here in Wilmington at the Mill. And we're going to have a new installation of some models in there coming sometime, I think, this summer. And believe it or not, our models have gone to Disney World, Disneyland Paris to be specific. Here is a corridor in Disneyland Paris, which shows you some plate glass exhibition cases all along the left and the right sides, and some of Hagley's patent models that came from the Rothschild collection are on display there today. But right now, this is sort of where all the models are being displayed. They're in a separate collection storage facility here on the Hagley grounds, and they are placed up on shelves, and very few people get to see the scope of this collection of the many thousands of models that we have here. But even just looking at one shelf, you can just see how fascinating they are, and just imagine the stories that they could tell. Well, all that changed with the coming of the Nation Inventors exhibit that is opening up this fall. We're really going to get an opportunity for you to see many more of these models, to hear their stories of the inventors themselves, to understand how important innovation was to America, to learn about the inventors, women, men, immigrants who have made, who helped build America and helped solve all of our problems. Well, not all of our problems, but use innovation to solve some of our problems. And we're going to recreate, at least on a small scale, what some of those cases would have looked like in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office way back in the 19th century, to bring them back to their proper place and their proper setting, hopefully to inspire you and others and children and school children to come to visit, to invent and come up with their own new ideas. In the meantime, until that exhibit opens, we always have our collection online. You can see Hagley's entire museum collection, and especially the patent models at this particular website right here. And so if you have a free moment, whenever you got your iPad and you're sitting there in your lounge chair, you can get online and go check out some models. Who knows? Maybe it will inspire you to come up with a new invention yourself. So that's all for my talk, and I guess we'll take some questions now, right, Roger?
Yes, exactly. Let's do a Zoom clap for Chris's presentation. And Chris, why don't you stop the museum share, the slide share, so we can see everybody here.
Okay.
I hope people here might not realize that this is really breaking news. This exhibit is being built now as we are talking, and you're seeing something which is not widely out there in the public to get the sense of what the exhibit's going to look like, what the story is. So you're very fortunate that we've been able to have Chris here to share this with us. We already have had several questions in the chat. I answered one. The largest collection of patent models is the Smithsonian. The U.S. Patent Office does not collect patent models.